If you think you need a huge backyard to grow serious amounts of food, think again. Today I'm showing you 7 crops that turn a small garden into a food-producing machine. The same crops highly efficient small-space farmers use to outproduce backyards several times their size, using little more than a few square feet, a trellis, and a completely different way of thinking about what a garden is for. Plant them the wrong way, though, and you'll waste space, fight poor yields, and end up disappointed with your harvest. I learned that the hard way, following conventional gardening advice, wide rows, generous walking paths, 1 crop per bed, that was never actually designed for small spaces. It's advice built for people with acreage, handed down to people with a 4x8 raised bed. Here's the shift that changed everything for me. Stop measuring your garden by its size and start measuring it by how much food each square foot produces. That single mindset change is the difference between a garden that limps along producing a handful of tomatoes and one that keeps you in vegetables from spring through frost. Crop number 7 shocked me the most, grown correctly. It quietly outproduced several of my larger garden beds combined, using a corner of the yard I used to consider unusable. If you're new here, subscribe to Garden Workshop for practical systems that help small-space gardeners maximize harvests, efficiency, and productivity without needing more land. And if you're ready to put these ideas into action, I've created my complete small-space garden blueprint. It shows you the exact layouts, planting systems, crop combinations, and space-saving strategies to grow more food in less space. You can get it using the first link in the description below, or simply visit the top of my YouTube channel and click the link there. Before you plant another seed, here's exactly what I'd grow, why, and how to avoid the mistakes that quietly cap most small gardens' yields. Before we get to the crop list, it's worth understanding why this approach works, because the crops alone aren't the secret. The system around them is. In parts of Kenya and Nigeria, smallholder farmers working with tiny plots, sometimes just a few square meters, including vertical sack gardens and homestead intercropping, routinely outproduce backyard gardens many times their size. These aren't farmers with better soil, a better climate, or more free time. Many are working with degraded soil, unreliable rainfall, and land they don't even own. The difference is entirely in the system. Continuous harvest over one-time harvest. A tomato plant can keep producing for months. A head of lettuce gives you 1 cut and it's done. When space is limited, every crop needs to justify the real estate it occupies for as long as it occupies it, and crops that keep giving win every time. Vertical growing. If you can grow upward, you've multiplied your growing area without adding a single square foot of land. Climbing beans, vining squash, and trellis cucumbers turn empty air above a bed into productive ground. A simple bamboo teepee or a length of fencing wire can double what a bed produces. Layering and succession planting. As soon as 1 crop comes out, another goes in. Fast crops like radishes or leafy greens get harvested and cleared before slower crops like tomatoes or peppers even need the room. So 1 bed effectively runs 2 or 3 growing cycles instead of 1. There's no bed sitting empty for 3 weeks while you decide what to plant next. The next crop is already decided before the current one is finished. Keep those 3 principles in mind as you go through the list below, because they're exactly why each of these 7 crops earns its spot. None of them made the list because they're trendy or traditional. They made it because of what they return per square foot. The 7 crops. 1. Cowpeas, black-eyed peas. Cowpeas are a nitrogen fixer, meaning they actively improve your soil while they grow, a rare case of a crop paying you back in more than food. You also get 2 harvests from 1 plant. Tender young leaves can be picked early on and cooked like spinach, and the plant later fills out with a full pod harvest. Grow them up a fence, trellis, or simple string support, and they'll climb rather than sprawl across the ground, freeing up the soil beneath them for a fast-growing companion like radishes. The biggest mistake with cowpeas is planting them like bush beans, flat and spaced wide. Give them something to climb, and the yield roughly doubles for the same footprint too. Climbing beans. Unlike bush beans, which flower once, fruit once, and finish for the season, pole beans keep producing for weeks, sometimes months, as long as you harvest consistently. Picking every 2 to 3 days actually signals the plant to keep flowering. Letting pods mature and dry on the vine tells the plant its job is done and shuts production down. On a simple trellis or teepee, a strip of ground just a couple of feet wide can out-yield an entire bed of bush beans planted the conventional way. Pair them with something low-growing and shade-tolerant underneath, since the vines will eventually block a lot of direct sun at ground level 3. Amaranth. Grown for its leaves rather than a fruit or root, amaranth is what's called a cut-and-come-again crop. Harvest the outer leaves, and the plant simply grows more from the center, giving you repeat harvests from the same plant for months. It tolerates heat, drought, and poor soil far better than lettuce or spinach, which makes it one of the highest yield per square foot leafy greens you can grow anywhere, but especially in a small space where you can't afford a crop that bolts and dies at the first hot week. A dozen plants in a couple of square feet can supply a household with greens continuously through summer 4. Okra. A single healthy okra plant will keep producing pods continuously through the entire warm season, provided you harvest every couple of days. Pods left on the plant too long turn woody and also slow down new production, the same way beans do. Because okra grows tall and narrow rather than wide and sprawling, it earns very little ground space relative to how much food comes off it over a season. It also tolerates heat and neglect better than almost anything else on this list, making it one of the most forgiving high-yield crops for a beginner 5. Sweet potato. Grown as a spreading vine, sweet potato does double duty in a way few other crops manage. The leaves are edible, nutritious, and can be harvested throughout the season without hurting the tuber crop below, and as they spread, they act as a living mulch that shades out weeds and holds moisture in the soil. Meanwhile, the tubers form entirely underground, so they take up no additional surface space beyond the vine itself. A small mound or grow bag can produce a surprising number of tubers by the end of the season. All from ground that also gave you months of edible greens along the way. 6. Moringa. Technically a tree but kept pruned to shrub height, moringa becomes an extraordinarily efficient leaf crop. It can be harvested roughly every 2 to 3 weeks, regrows quickly after cutting, and in the right climate keeps producing nearly year-round. The leaves are dense in nutrients, and because the plant is grown vertically and pruned hard, a single moringa shrub occupies barely more ground space than a large pepper plant while producing far more usable food over a season. It's one of the clearest examples on this list of vertical growing turning a small footprint into an outsized harvest. 7. Cassava, the one that genuinely surprised me. Planted along a fence line, in a back corner, or in any awkward strip most gardeners would leave empty or grass over, a small stand of cassava can out-yield an entire dedicated bed of a conventional root crop like carrots or potatoes. It needs almost no maintenance once established, tolerates poor and marginal soil that would struggle to support most vegetables, and quietly builds a substantial harvest underground with very little input from you. It's slower than everything else on this list. It takes months to mature, but for a space you weren't using anyway, it's close to free food. The mistakes that kill small space yields even with the right crops. A handful of habits will quietly cap what your garden can produce, giving too much room to low-yield crops. This usually happens out of habit. A crop gets planted a certain way because that's how it's supposed to be grown, not because that spacing actually makes sense for a small garden. When space is limited, every square foot needs to earn its place, and a sprawling, low-producing plant can crowd out 2 or 3 higher-yield options, leaving beds empty between harvests. Highly efficient growers rarely let space sit unused for weeks. They already know what's going in next before the current crop is even finished, so there's no gap where the soil is producing nothing at all, ignoring vertical space. Most gardeners focus entirely on the ground and forget that fences, trellises, and simple supports create an entirely new growing plane above the bed. space that costs nothing and competes with nothing else in the garden, planting crops individually instead of as a system. The farmers this approach is drawn from think in terms of how crops support one another, how a nitrogen fixer like cowpeas can feed a heavy feeder nearby, how a fast crop can be harvested before a slow one needs the room, how a vine can shade the soil for something beneath it. Planting one crop at a time in isolation misses most of that value. Avoid these 4 mistakes and you're already gardening very differently and more effectively than the average backyard grower. Bringing it together, measure your garden by food per square foot, not by its size. Prioritize crops that deliver continuous harvests over crops that produce once and finish. Grow vertically wherever possible. The fastest way to expand a small garden is up, not out. Layer crops and use succession planting so one harvest flows directly into the next, with no bed left idle. Eliminate wasted space by giving every section of the garden a clear purpose. Think in systems, not individual plants. How crops support and follow each other matters as much as what you plant. That's the real secret behind these high-output growing spaces. They're not working with more land, better equipment, or bigger budgets. They're using a smarter system to get more food out of every square foot they have. And for a small space gardener, that shift in thinking can completely change what's possible in a backyard, a raised bed, or even a handful of containers on a patio. Before you go, which of these strategies stood out to you the most? Was it growing vertically, layering crops with succession planting, choosing high-output crops like cassava and moringa, or treating every square foot like valuable real estate? And if you could only keep one, vertical growing or succession planting, which would you pick? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this and want more practical systems for maximizing harvests and getting more food from less space, subscribe to Garden Workshop. And if you know someone who thinks they need a bigger backyard to grow more food, send them this video. Sometimes the real limitation isn't space, it's strategy. And one last thing, if you're ready to turn your small garden into a high-producing food garden, don't forget to grab my small space garden blueprint. The link is in the description below, and you'll also find it at the top of my YouTube channel under the links section. It'll help you put everything you've learned today into a simple, step-by-step system. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next garden workshop.